Hello, my name is David Schaefer. My action research project is titled Analyzing the Effectiveness of Rewards-Based Classroom Management Strategies. So this research project took place at the school where I work, which is an alternative school in Pennsylvania. So one of the issues that we deal with here is classroom management. It's probably about half of what we do, just making sure our classrooms are safe places that students are able to learn and feel secure in their environment. So the question that we're asking in this project is, how effective is the school's point-based system at encouraging positive classroom behavior? So I want to go into a little bit about what this system is and kind of how it works. So the point system that we use here, there's 5 points for each class that is taught. So there's 6 classes throughout the day, a total of 30 points that a student can earn. So the 5 points that they earn, they're all based on positive classroom behaviors. So preparation, interaction, following directions, work, and effort are all each point in the system. So preparation refers to someone being prepared for class, being on time, having all their materials, their homework, they're in their seat, they're ready to learn, they're regulated. Interaction has to do with how they respond to staff members, how they interact with their classmates. Are they using appropriate language? Are they using appropriate tone? Those are all things that we would look for. Following directions is just that, being able to comply with the staff's direction within the first 1 or 2 prompts. So something that they can respond when asked to change their behavior. Work and effort are tied in together. They go hand in hand. So if a student is able to complete their work in class and if they put effort into it. So occasionally you'll get a student who might rush through their work, or they don't do the best job. It's obvious they didn't put effort into it. Or maybe they were trying hard, but they weren't able to complete their work. So they might earn 1 out of those 2 points. Now the point system has rewards built into it. So as students earn their points consistently, they're entitled to various rewards throughout the school year. So earning consistent points for 10 days entitles the students to a special lunch. We have special lunches every month. They can also have their counselor go out and pick up takeout for them occasionally. Again, if they're consistent with earning their points, then they're also entitled to off-campus fun field trips. Going places, maybe to the movies if there's a good movie coming out, farms, the zoo, the aquarium. There's a ski trip in the wintertime. So when students are able to consistently demonstrate positive behavior and earn their points, then they're entitled to some of these rewards. So this system, we think, has been encouraging good behavior. So my project is to kind of look at this system and see just how effective is this at motivating the students to behave properly. So there's a lot of relevant research into this topic. I was able to find a lot of different things. So I'm just going to share some of that I found. So the first, we're going to look at some research that was able to support the idea of using incentives to modify and encourage good classroom behavior. So we see Wheatley et al. In 2009 found in a study that using a variety of incentives, including small prizes, proved to be effective when encouraging on-task behavior in an unstructured setting. I think this research was done during lunch times, and they were able to show that providing incentives was able to encourage good behavior. Whedon, Wills, Kotwitz, and Camps in 2016 studied a token reward system, and they found that that was effective when paired with individual and group praise for appropriate classroom behaviors. So using tokens with other strategies proved to be a pretty effective approach. Also, Xenos in 2012 found that incentives and rewards as part of a larger strategy of classroom management can be effective at reducing unwanted behavior. So I also found some research that didn't quite agree with using incentives. So Payne in 2015 said that incentives may motivate positive behavior, but do not contribute a desire to work any harder. Xenos also said in 2012 that when used exclusively, point systems can negatively affect a student's intrinsic motivation to learn. Also, Hurley in 2016 found that point systems that publicly display the student's progress or lack thereof can lead to feelings of inadequacy, stress, embarrassment, anxiety, and isolation. So there's some common themes in some of this research. So it seems to agree that using points alone isn't enough, using incentives alone. There needs to be other behavior management tactics involved in these strategies. So, in light of all this, my proposal for this project was, does the prospect of earning points, like we do at the school where I work, towards rewards provide motivation for on-test behavior? Specifically, if students are offered full points, regardless of their classroom behavior, will there be similar efforts towards positive classroom behavior? So, the participants in my study, this is a convenient sample. So these are the kids that I personally teach. So I picked two classes that alternate. We have A and B days. So they're physical education classes, and these are high school age students. So students from about 15 through 19. So there were 20 total students. There were 10 in each class. Again, there's an A and a B day, and these classes alternated. So there's a variety of ethnicities in these classes. I've had Hispanic, Asian, Caucasian, African American students. So there's a wide variety. They come from different backgrounds, different areas. So there's kids from the city, the suburbs. We have semi-rural kids. So these are from 2 neighboring counties, and it covers a pretty big area. So we have a wide variety of students, and at our school we tend to get a mix of different types of students. So, and also there's a ratio of 6 males and 4 females in each class. So it was pretty even in that way. So the way that I recorded my data, I used these progress monitoring sheets, as you can see here. So this is quantitative data. There's tangible point numbers that I was able to record. This was recorded by hand for each student. I had one of these sheets for every student, and I had them in binders organized, and I was able to give the students labels depending on their class. So 1A, student 1A, student 2A, student 3B. So and I was able to keep track of their points for every class. So I recorded them by hand. I had room to write notes if necessary, but it was very quantitative and numerical. So the way my procedures worked with recording these points, so it was a total of 4 weeks for these classes. So I had 2 weeks of, I was keeping track of the points on those sheets. Normally, I was recording them like I would always normally do. The students knew the expectations. Now, the standards are the same for all their classes, so they're used to this system. So for 2 weeks, I used this as a baseline to record points that they're earning, their behavior, and then there were 2 weeks of earning modified points. And what this meant was that during this time, I would inform them at the beginning of every class that they're earning all their points regardless of their behavior. So there were still consequences for their behavior. If they were to get into a fight, then we'd have to put them through the appropriate behavior management process. If they were completely not participating, they would still perform poorly in their class. But as far as earning rewards, they were earning their points. So regardless of what they did, even if they did get into a fight, even if they did curse out a teacher, they would get these points towards their reward. So during this time, they knew that they were getting their full points, and they really were. There was no trick about that. But I was also recording privately the points that they would have earned if we were keeping track of points normally. So if a student was interacting inappropriately, then I would record that they wouldn't have earned their interaction point. So I was doing this in order to compare the results of our baseline points that they were earning, and then we're going to compare them to these modified points. How does their behavior change when they're offered full points? So these are the raw numbers, the raw data for each class, for the A and B classes. You can see 10 students in each. Now, if you look closely, there are a lot of A's in bold, and the A stands for absences. So unfortunately, working at an alternative school, absences are things that we deal with. So that did have an effect on some students. I did not include, well, when we get to the data analysis, I'll talk more about what we did with the absences. But that's the raw data right there. So after recording the raw data, I put those numbers into an Excel spreadsheet, and I was able to average the numbers. So per student, I was able to average what they earned for their normal week versus their modified week. And I was also able to average the class totals. So I could see this class, the average points that was earned during this period. So I divided up those the raw data into two sections for normal and their modified points. So these are the averages, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. And then I also made graphs for a visual comparison. So some notable things, you can see that some of the effects of absences, like student 8A over here, was not present during the modified phase. So that whole time period they were absent. For class B, I actually had 2 students who were absent for the entire study. So it's hard to find consistency a lot of times, and that we'll talk about that more when we get to our limitations. But these are the graph totals, and we'll talk more about that in just a second. So for discussion, for class A, let's look at it a little bit closer. We can see that the class average, when they're earning points normally, they earned 4.1 points. And then when we moved to the modified average, that dropped a little bit to 3.69 points. And we can see that on the graph. Now, we did have the one absence for student 8A, but they did earn their full points during their normal point earning time, so it's hard to see whether their modified time that they would earn anything different. So it's also important to note that 7 out of these 10 students earned equal points or less when normal or more when normal incentives were in place. So when we get to our results and discussion, we'll talk about how there seems to be a trend that generally the majority of students earned more points when incentives were in place. So let's look at class B now. So not as big of a change, but there's a reason for that. So our class average when they're earning points normally was 3.33. And it dropped just a little bit to 3.3 when we modified it. Again, we have some absences, so 2 students completely, we didn't count anything for them. They weren't there at all. However, student 6B, we noticed there was a pretty big difference. So during the normal point average, they only earned 0.8 points. And then when they were in the modified period where they were earning their full points, their actual behavior would have earned them 3.75 points. So this student was a little bit of an outlier, and I remember during the study, during the weeks of normal point average, they were uncharacteristically unparticipating. I think there were issues outside of school or outside of that class that were affecting them, and so that was a little bit of an outlier, and that was one of the limitations in this study that we'll talk about in a little bit. So that the average would have been much different if it wasn't for that student. So 7 out of 8 students earned more points during their normal average than when we had modified time. Actually, everyone except for student 6B earned either the same amount of points over the two periods, the two phases, or earned less when we modified it, when they were earning their full points regardless of their behavior. So again, some of the limitations that we talked about, the short period of data collection was an issue. It was only for 4 weeks total. As you can see, this outlier student really affected the average for the one class. Absences were also an issue. So one of the ways to improve the study would be to do it longer. Also a limitation was the time of year that this happened. This happened through September into the beginning of October. So those of you that work in alternative schools know that usually at the beginning of the year, kids are much better behaved. They're coming out of their summer, and they're a lot more willing to work, willing to comply to directions. That changes throughout the year, especially as we get towards the holidays. A lot of students have, they come from broken families. This is a time where they tend to, they're reminded of that with all the emphasis on family and togetherness. So we definitely see a dip in behavior during that time. So maybe we would get different results if we were to do the study during the holidays, or maybe towards when we get close to summer, when the students are tired of being in school. So I think a longer study, you would get more of an accurate representation of how effective this point system is. So our conclusions. The data seems to suggest that there is a relationship between earning points or having incentives versus not having incentives. The students did seem to earn more of their point-based behavior points. So the data agrees with our previous research that we talked about, that when we have these incentive systems in place with other behavior management strategies, it tends to be effective, and that's what we see. Now here at our school, this isn't the only behavior management strategy that we use. We do a lot of things that's talked about in research. We try to have clear, consistent boundaries throughout classes. We really emphasize having positive staff-student relationships. I can speak personally that that is very effective in encouraging positive behavior. It's a lot easier to relate with kids and get them to comply to direction. So I think using incentive-based behavior management plus other forms of classroom management tends to be pretty effective, and I think that on its own it might not. But the research that I found seems to suggest just that it can be part of something bigger, but it does seem to be effective. There definitely was a noticeable difference. My recommendations would be to expand this research, do it for a longer period of time, do it with more students instead of just 20. So, but I do think that there is definitely some trends, some correlations at work here. So, just a couple of references. Thank you for taking the time to watch my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to your comments.